Hi everybody, this is Sarah and
Hi.
I'm Nigel, and we're from the charity Orangutan Veterinary Aid, or OVAID, and we've been working with orangutan in Borneo and Sumatra for about 10 years now. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about our story, but we also wanted to talk about the book that you've hopefully read, which is Buddy's Rainforest Rescue. So we want to share some of our stories and tell you a little bit about orangutan today. And some of it you'll already know if you've read the book, but we can perhaps expand on that. So a little bit first about orangutans. They're absolutely marvellous creatures. We love working with them. But some facts that you may not know. They're not particularly big. A big adult male orangutan is only about 5 foot tall, but he might weigh up to 100 kilos. And they're really, really strong. They're about 6 times as strong size for size as a person is. So a male orangutan my size would be, if you tackled him, it would be like tackling 6 men all in one go. And they live high in the trees in the forest. Pretty well most of their life they spend up in the trees. And they make a nest every night to sleep in. And they're the only great ape that actually makes a nest every single night. And they get up in the top of the trees and they pull the branches across and they make a really sort of comfortable nest, and they'll line it with some leaves. And if they're not happy, they go and pick another twig until they get it just right. And then they'll sleep there all night, and sometimes they'll sleep there in the day as well. So they live in the trees in the forest, and that's where they eat as well. So they eat all the fruits of the forest and they eat leaves. So they'll eat figs sometimes if they can find them. They eat guavas, which grow wild. And they also eat a really smelly fruit called durian, which some of you may have seen, which is a really spiky coated sort of fruit. And the orangutan absolutely love them. Sarah absolutely hates them.
They really smell.
Because they smell horrible. But the Indonesian people also think they're lovely. Orangutans will travel miles to get a durian. So they live on leaves and trees, a few sort of insects, but that's probably about all. And they also live on their own in the forest. So you won't find like big families of orangutan in the forest, like you do with monkeys. What you're likely to find is perhaps a mum and just a baby living alone in the forest. And they'll spend their life like that. And the baby will stay with the mum until it's maybe 7 or 8 years old. So a long, long time. And in that time it's learning from its mum how to survive in the forest when eventually it goes off on its own. And the other thing to mention also is that when they move through the trees, they move through the trees quite slowly. If you think of a lot of monkeys that leap from branch to branch and travel quite quickly, orangutans aren't like that. They tend to grab hold of sometimes even like a spindly sort of branch, and they'll just like fold over, and then they'll go from one to the other. So very slowly they move through the trees because they've got really long arms. Some orangutan have a handspan, if they put their arms out, of much more than sort of 6 feet, maybe 9 feet. Like that, yeah. So they can grab the trees and just swing through the trees. So what else? The jungle. Well, the jungle is an incredible place. Most of you won't have had the chance to be in the jungle. And you might imagine it's quite a quiet place, just in amongst the trees, but it's not at all, actually, is it, Sarah? It's really, really sort of noisy. So you get the noise of birds singing. Frogs make a huge amount of noise, and you get these really big insects called cicadas, which rub their wings together and produce a real big sort of screeching sound. And then you'll hear monkeys like macaques and gibbon, which like sing to each other in the morning. So it is really, really noisy when you're actually in the middle of the forest. And very often when we come back from Indonesia and we're back here in England, I actually can't sleep at night at first, because it's actually so quiet and I'm used to hearing all those noises all the time. So it's a little bit sort of strange. So how many orangutan have we got in the world? Some of you may know that. Certainly less than there used to be, because about 100 years ago there were probably 350,000 orangutan in the world. And now we think we're right down to maybe just only 50 or 60,000. So it's a massive sort of decrease in numbers. And so you might sort of say, well, why has that happened? Why have we only got 50,000 orangutan now? And the reason for that, and most of you probably do know, is that the forest is being cut down. So the orangutan loses its home, loses its habitat. And the more forest we cut down, apart from all the problems that we have with climate change and so on, the less wild animals that we have in the forest. And the trees are cut down sometimes because they want to mine for coal, sometimes because they're cutting the trees for logs, and sometimes it's for agriculture so that people can grow things.
Like in the book here.
Like in Buddy's book here. And the biggest agricultural product that's grown in Indonesia and which affects the orangutan is palm oil. And most of you will probably have heard about palm oil. And the problem is that they don't just cut down a few acres of trees to grow palm oil, they cut down hundreds if not thousands of acres. So some of these palm oil plantations where they're growing the trees can be the size of our cities in England. I've driven for 1 or 2 or 3 hours sometimes just through a palm oil plantation. And what do we use the palm oil for? I can see probably some of you got your hands up and shouting. It goes into a food. It goes into a lot of the fast foods that we have in the country. It goes into cosmetics. It goes into chocolate. It goes into your breakfast cereals and into all sorts of things.
Washing up liquid.
Washing up liquid.
Shampoo.
Yeah. So if you were to go shopping with your mum in the supermarket and you walked around with a trolley and you picked up all the things you needed, you can be sure that when you get to the lady at the checkout, probably half of your trolley is going to have palm oil in one form or another in it. So we use it every day, and the more we use it, the more palm oil is needed, the more forest is cut down, and the more the orangutans suffer. So it is a really big problem which you can probably sort of discuss with your teacher. And you can see it also in the book, because as Sarah just showed you the picture, they're cutting down the forest, and you'll have seen in the book where Buddy's forest is being cut down, and they use chainsaws and they use big bulldozers. And you've probably seen the picture here in the book where Buddy is actually trying to save his little patch of forest, and he's fighting off or trying to fight off the bulldozer. But unfortunately it's a really difficult job, and some orangutan unfortunately do get killed when they cut down the forest, but a lot of them do manage to be rescued, and some are taken as pets to keep in people's homes, although it's illegal. And the problem there is that they don't know how to feed them, or they can't afford to feed them properly. But if they're lucky like Buddy, it may be that they are rescued by one of the rescue centres and taken to a rescue and rehabilitation centre. And even that is quite difficult, because you can imagine, if you imagine little sort of Buddy, his home's being cut down, the trees are lost, he's frightened, he's lost his mummy in all the sort of turmoil. So to catch him, the only way sometimes is to actually use a dart and a blowpipe. So one of the keepers will follow sort of Buddy in the forest until he thinks he can get a good shot, and he'll put the blowpipe to his mouth and puff.
See the blowpipe here.
And then a dart will hopefully hit the orangutan or Buddy, and the dart contains some anaesthetic, and then after a few minutes the orangutan goes really sleepy. And if they're high in a tree, it's a problem, because then they're going to fall. So what do? Well, we have a great big net, a huge net, and 5 or 6 or 7 people will stand under the tree where the orangutan's been darted and hold out the net, and somebody's watching, and somebody will shout and say now, and they'll stretch the net out, and then the orangutan falls safely into the net and can be picked up. And then the orangutan's taken back to the rescue centre. And that's sort of where Sarah and I come in quite a bit, because we've worked in those rescue centres in Borneo and Sumatra, which is the only place where you find orangutan now. And we've helped the vet teams. And our charity also helps the vet teams, because we supply medicines and equipment for the vets, as well as actually working there with them. So we might be there when an orangutan comes into the centre. And if you look at one of the pages in Buddy's book, you can actually see a picture of Sarah and I working away with an orangutan in the centre, which the lady who drew the pictures kindly put us in the picture. So the orangutan comes into the centre, the vets will have a look, they'll check it over, make sure it's healthy, perhaps it's got a cut or a wound on it, and we'll sort of stitch that up, and the vets will take really sort of good care of the orangutan. And then the orangutan has to be introduced to the other ones in the centre. And if you think about it, in the case of like sort of Buddy, he's been with his mum all the time in the forest on his own, so he's not really met many other orangutan. So he has to learn, just like you do when you sort of go to school, how to interact with other people, how to make friends, how some people sometimes can say sort of horrible things and you get angry with them, but you have to sort of control that. So you learn life skills, as we sort of call them. So what the vets will do in the centres is to put the young orangutans in the same age group all together. We call it buddying them up, actually. So we give them a buddy to learn from and to be a friend, and they can sleep with them at night. And they learn things from them. They learn about climbing, and you might find that one orangutan is perhaps quite good at making a nest, and that will teach another one how to do it. And another one might know which fruit to pick from the tree, and it will teach the orangutan which fruit to pick from the tree. So as they grow and learn together in what we call baby school, because we take them every day out into the forest and the keepers look after them. We might take them out, but then the keepers live with them or stay with them all day long, feed them and look after them, and watch them and put them together and make sure that they're safe and learning the skills of the forest that they're going to need ultimately if the keepers can manage to get them back into the wild. So that's what we call baby school. It is a bit like sort of primary school. As they get a bit bigger, the keepers will pick them out and then take them to secondary school. And that means that they're a little bit more on their own and a little bit more independent, just as you will be as you go through your sort of schooling.
It's actually called forest school. So as they get a bit older, so they go from baby school to forest school. So that's like going up to an academy or something like that.
And they still manage to learn the skills, but the other thing with orangutan is that they love people. They like the company, so they like to be with us, which is lovely when they're small, but if we're going to put them back into the forest, if they're going to live in the forest on their own eventually, they mustn't get too attached to humans. So the vets and the keepers will be very careful not to interact too much with them and to give them a bit of space. So as they grow and carry on in the rescue centre over a year or two, they have less and less to do with the orangutan. So the orangutan become more and more independent.
They go back to being wild, which is what they need to be.
Yeah. So the hope would be, and it may take 6 or 7 years, but perhaps after those sort of 6 or 7 years, those orangutan, like Buddy in the book, will be able to climb, they'll be able to build a nest, they'll be able to find what food they want in the forest. And they're getting ready to be able to be put back into the life that they should be leading in the wild. And it's important that they learn these skills before we release them, otherwise they really sort of can't survive. So as you read through Buddy's book, you'll see that he goes through forest school.
So you can see
there he is.
They're starting to learn to climb again, because actually if they've come in as very small babies, they even need to learn how to climb. So it's a matter of the people working at the orangutan rescue centres to give them the confidence to learn to climb. But like little babies or children, they are scared to begin with. So it's just a matter of building their confidence, because they need to learn how to be wild again.
So that's the whole sort of process through what we call rehabilitation. And the idea of rehabilitation is that they learn these skills to be able to survive. And once they've got those skills, the next problem obviously is to get them back into the forest. Just before we do that though, what the vets will do is do a small operation, and they put a little radio transmitter in the back of the neck, just under the skin. It doesn't hurt the orangutan at all. And the idea is that after the orangutan is released back into the forest, they'll be able to track the orangutan by a radio signal just to see that it's safe and coping okay. But then they also have to find some forest that's safe for the orangutan, and it needs to be a long way away from where anybody is logging or mining. It needs to be away from the villages, because the orangutan otherwise will go to the villages because they'll know that there's food there, and we want them to stay in the forest. So the keepers will pick a special piece of forest, and it may be several miles away, maybe even 2 or 3 days away from the rehabilitation centre. So once they're ready, the orangutan, like Buddy, will be put into a little safe cage, put on the back of a truck, and then they're transported across the country, and sometimes it may be 1 or 2 days across country, and then perhaps up a river in a little boat. And then they even have to be carried for several kilometres by men. They have a long pole between their shoulders carrying the cage, and they'll walk into the jungle until they've found a really sort of safe spot with a bit of a clearing and some nice trees. And then as you can see in the picture in the book, somebody will lift up that front of that cage, and there's the forest in front of the orangutan, and Buddy can sort of see the forest, and he knows that he's home again, and most of them just run out and climb up the tree. Sometimes they look back, and other times off they just go and straight into the trees, and that's what the keepers want to see. They want to see that orangutan realise it's back in the forest and just disappear off into the trees. And that's a wonderful feeling if you can be there to see the orangutan released, because it means that we've all achieved our job and what we wanted to do and given life back to that little orangutan. So that's sort of the story of what we do. As I say, we help the vets in terms of giving them medicines and so on.
But we also do training and scholarships as well. So we feel it's really important that that we help the Indonesian vets as much as we can, and Malaysian vets. So we offer a scholarship so that the vets can actually come back to the UK to learn extra skills, specific skills that they want to learn. It might be dentistry, it might be ophthalmology, all sorts of things, but they get that extra training to enable them to go back and teach their whole teams how to do that one skill.
So that's where it's important, and when we get donations in from people who support us, that's what we use the money for, to buy medicines and to help the vets train so that we can improve the welfare of the orangutan and improve the care that they're able to have. So that's our little sort of story about the orangutan. I hope you found it interesting. I hope you've learnt one or two things. But then just before we go, there is one other thing that I was going to tell you about, and that is the name orangutan comes from the Malay language, and orang means person and hutan means forest. So when you put the two together, orang-hutan, you get orangutan, and that means person of the forest. And that's important to remember because orangutan are very important to the forest. The forest is important to the orangutan, and the orangutan are important to the forest. And how's that, you might ask? Well, if you think about it, the orangutan sometimes they can eat up to 200 different types of fruits and leaves in the forest. And you can imagine if they eat a lot of food, then what they do is poo out a lot as well. But in that poo are the seeds of the fruit and the seeds from the trees. So you can imagine that an orangutan which is feeding in the forest and then travels a mile or two through the forest will leave those seeds will drop to the ground, and they'll germinate and they'll grow new trees and new fruit trees. So the forest is regenerated. So in some ways the orangutan depends on the forest for its food, but in some respects the forest depends on the orangutan to keep it regenerated and keep it fresh and keep it growing. So that's why we think it's important to look after the orangutan. We want to do the right thing for the orangutan, but we also want to do the right thing for the forest. So that's our little story.
And the planet.
And the planet.
The planet needs the forest. We need the forest to survive, and that's why climate change, is happening. If we don't protect the forests, it's not just orangutan that live in those forests. You've got all the insects, all the other species. You've got tigers, rhinoceros, elephants, pangolins, all sorts of animals, strange, weird and wonderful animals, and they all help provide that special place, the rainforest, and we call them, they are the lungs of the earth, and without them, we as humans, we need them as much as they need us. So the orangutan need the forest, we need the forest.
We do. So that's our little story. We hope that it's kept you interested. We hope perhaps it's put some seeds of ideas into what you might be able to do to help.
There's lots of lists at the back of information at the back of the book, Buddy's Rainforest, about what you can do, all sorts of extra information, but also, how to be a wild tribe hero and how to protect the rainforest from being destroyed. There's lots of information in there on how you can do that and how you can help and do your bit to save the rainforest and the orangutan.
Perfect. So have fun, speak to your teacher.
Enjoy it.
And enjoy the book, and think about the orangutan, think about the forest, think about the planet, and everything will be better for us hopefully in the end.
And take action.
Take action. Thank you very much.
You can help support us in any way you can. Then that would be brilliant, because the more you can support us, the more orangutan lives we can save. So thank you very much. Enjoy the book.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.